Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, I'll be discussing my thoughts on episode 7 of the anime series, DanMachi. And I gotta say, I thoroughly enjoyed this episode, not least of which because, and almost singularly because, we finally have a bridging of the character dynamics of Bell and Eyes, respectively. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've been loving and dying of laughter in the previous episodes, and even in this episode, every time he squeals incredulously and he tries to get away from her. She's been wanting to talk to him for some time, and like the previous episode where he curls up into the ball in the dungeon and he speeds off a la Sonic the Hedgehog. I mean, I'm dying of laughter every time he has this reaction to her, but I really love the fact that we have now forward progression with these characters, finally bringing them together, and not before we actually have another bringing together in this episode to do with Bell, Hestia, and Lilaruka, respectively. Lilaruka, I love how, as far as her story and the whole Souma Familia thing, I had an overhanging question and qualm about how she would sort of move beyond the threat of Souma Familia coming after her repeatedly, tracking her down. Would these characters come together and help fend off attacks from them and everything like that? And we actually have a nice, cushy little explanation as to how they will probably no longer seek her, and that is a transformation ability, where for all intents and purposes, I guess to everyone living in this world, she completely looks different now. To me, the viewer, she doesn't look anything that different at all. And it's kind of reminding me back, you know, Sword Art Online, when you had the first story arc was the Aincrad arc, and the second was the ALO, or Alvalheim Online, and you have the main character of the series, Kirito. You know, he's supposed to get into this sort of elfin guise with wings and everything and pointy ears, and everyone's saying how different he looks, and even his sister doesn't recognize him and everything like that. But to you, the viewer, he just has pointy ears now, you know? Like, you can tell it's him. Well, it's very much the same thing with Lilaruka. You can still tell it's her, but apparently, you know, Bell and Hestia are going to be the only ones who really know who she is, who she was, and everything like that. And that's of the utmost importance to her. But again, talking about bridging the dynamics between those characters, Bell brings her back to his little sort of broken down church, I guess, homestead, if you will, and kind of leaves Hestia and Lilaruka to battle it out, so to speak, because Hestia is very much wanting to pick up the reins where Bell is forgiving and has faith in Lilaruka and trust in her, even after everything she's done. He was very selfless in trying to protect her and save her. She is going to pick up the reins of distrust, of judgment, and everything like that. I thought this was going to be a really rocky start for these two characters, but after basically Hestia lays down all this foundation of how I'm going to judge you, I'm going to be the one to judge you where he isn't going to, and all this stuff, and it really deflates Lilaruka and makes her feel all depressed, and she's already carrying around the guilt for what she did to Bell, trying to, you know, leave him high and dry in the dungeon and everything like that, make off with his dagger, all that stuff. I love how it sort of becomes a playful dynamic all of a sudden, where she's like, okay, well, I want you to babysit him when I'm not around. I want you to take care of him, make sure nobody else is going to, you know, get into his good graces and use and abuse him like you tried to do and all this stuff. And then she's like, oh, and one final thing. And Bell ends up coming back with the tea at this point. So she ends up glomming onto Bell and making the point, an overabundance of making this point that, you know, hands off, he's my man, and all this stuff. And I absolutely died and loved the fact that Lilaruka, she throws off her cape and cowl and she grabs onto Bell on the other side. And it's basically rising to that challenge of being like, you know, we're going to fight over this guy. After which, of course, he tries to get away from both of them. And there's this moment where he pauses outside the little church. And I love this because it's an acknowledgement of the fact that these two girls are going to be more playful in their dynamic between each other, bickering over him, whose boyfriend is he going to be, and everything like that. You know, he's very satisfied by this, being able to hear this and leave them that way, because much as we, the viewer, you know, are acknowledging, he too is able to satisfyingly acknowledge that there isn't going to be sort of a drama between them, and it's going to be more playful and fun and everything like that. I just really enjoyed that fact. Of course, he's going to look for Aina, and this is what leads him to run smack dab right into Eyes. You know, Aina imparting the fact, much as we already are aware, that Eyes has been wanting to talk to him for a while. Much as I speculated as well, she returns his arm gauntlet, which proves the fact that she was there to save him in the dungeon, just precursor to him going and saving Lilaruka and everything like that. Not before which he tries to make a hasty getaway once again, even to the point of squealing. You know, I just lost it. I mean, he tries to run out of the place, and he runs like headlong into Arnold Schwarzenegger, or this Conan the Barbarian looking dude. And then, of course, Eyes jumps across the room. He walks right into her butt, and hilarity ensues. But this is where we finally have the bridging of the gap between them. And it stands as a prologue to this great sequence where essentially their dialogue is, you know, oh, you've been training really hard. This is, of course, Eyes talking to Belle, and you've become really strong. And Belle's trying to downplay it and everything. At least to him, he hasn't gone nearly as long and far as he needs to go to match her, which is kind of his own self-competitorship. He wants to become as strong as Eyes is. And so she's like, well, have you had training? And he's basically saying no. And she is the one who offers to train him. And so we have this great sequence, you know, of laughs, of action, where she's training him on this wall. Like, it almost looks like a kingdom wall, you know, sort of high up on the thing. And she's kicking his ass every step of the way. And I love how she calls him out on being a coward, but she very much turns it sort of 180-degree turn. Like, she's not judgmental or dismissive of that fact. It is because he is cowardly. He is, you know, more about self-preservation and everything that's kept him alive. That keeps him alive whenever he goes into the dungeon and he faces off against these monsters. He knows when to quit and what his limitations are, as long as he's not being impetuous, which we did see is somewhat of his, you know, nature when he unlocked that fire casting ability, and he sort of used it up and made himself pass out. But as he's taking more seriously the training, and especially what she's trying to guide him and teach him toward, I love it. I love the skills that he is adapting. We see him going into the dungeon with Lilaruka, and I thought it was a flashback for a second because she's once again talking about having a day off. So I guess she gets like a day off every week or whatever it is. But he is kicking tons of ass, and he's actually using the martial arts techniques that, you know, Eyes has taught him and favored him with. And I love that. I also love how it kind of turns toward, you know, she's getting tired, and she's talking about, well, here's the nap time lesson. You got to be able to fall asleep anywhere, no matter your surroundings, in the dungeon, to recoup your energy. And he's like, oh, you're just tired, aren't you? And she gets right up in his face, and she's like, no, this is part of the lesson. She passes out cold. You know, and then all of a sudden he's like got this weird dream imaginary sequence where the spirits of like his grandparents or whoever it is like, you know, the grandfather's telling him to go and kiss her. That's what she wants. And then the grandmother, or whoever the voice is, Hestia, is like, no, I'm not going to let you do it. And he almost does. And in her sleeping sort of stupor, Eyes says, wait. Or is she sleeping? I don't know. Beg the question. You know, but he launches back, and he's kind of like incredulous over this. And then, of course, they decide to go get some eats. He's sort of once again, oh, I don't really need to eat. You know, he's very ashamed of his frailties in front of Eyes. But she's like, don't worry, I'm hungry too. And who do they run into? Apparently another job Hestia has as a sort of, you know, one of these little food things on the side of the road. You know? And, of course, the hilarity ensues when Hestia feels heartbroken, like once again Belle has completely gone and he's cheating on her, and now he's cheating with the woman he has and holds in such importance. And so they have this little back alley discussion about, well, you better keep your hands off him and all this stuff. And the most important nugget of information that came out of that sequence, other than the hilarity and other than Eyes sort of looking over Belle and everything and getting up Hestia's ire even more, is the fact that we find out Loki Familia, of course Eyes' Familia, is going to be leaving for a quest very shortly. Now, this whole episode is actually bookended by one overriding factor which calls back to Freya. And it's this guy that we only see toward the middle and tail end of the episode, Toaru, who apparently Freya has sort of put into work to go into the dungeons and train this giant oversized Minotaur. He has, like, you know, he breaks the Minotaur's sword, he breaks the Minotaur's, one of his horns, and he's really challenging and trying to make this thing a lethal, you know, steam train overrun and everything like that. And I think the whole purpose of that is to set up potentially Bel's downfall, because there is discussion of Freya, saying as far as his strength goes, and even this Toaru is basically acknowledging the fact that as an adventurer, if he continues to get stronger and stronger and stronger, he can break free of whatever it is, whatever is clamped onto him, probably that strain of magic that even Hestia doesn't understand is a part of his whole mechanism and Bel's whole makeup and everything like that. He can overcome it. He can break away from it, break free from it. So, of course, Freya is very tentatively concerned about that and wanting to have this Toaru guy deal with it, whatever that means. We see that this character is, as I say, training this Minotaur to become highly lethal, and is he going to send it after Hestia? Is he going to send it after Bel? Eyes, other goddesses? I'm not exactly sure how this is going to play out, but it's a very important piece of this puzzle for this episode, because we know this is disaster potentially yet to come. And so, I mean, this whole episode, it was just awesome. I loved the pacing, I loved the comedy, and as I say, the selling point for this episode for me was seeing Bel and Eyes, of course, coming together, and actually her training him and everything. As funny and hilarious as that was, we see it as having benefits in his adapting the martial arts, as I say. And so just another kick-ass episode. I can't wait to see where we go from here, and I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of episode 7 of DanMachi, if you've seen it. Otherwise, I highly recommend you check it out if you haven't already. And so, yeah, that'll be pretty much it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.